Okay, thanks for joining us. Today we're going to talk about the 1 hour SO2 NAAQS, some of the history and background around its implementation, and then we're going to move to the data requirements rule that basically sets the stage for how the SO2 implementation process is going to look moving forward. And every time there's a rule that comes out that has a direct impact on facilities, like a boiler MACT or something similar, we want to be talking about it. And we view the SO2 NAAQS and specifically the data requirements rule as fitting that criteria, where there's going to be direct capital impacts on facilities that are subject to it. So it's an important topic and a timely one as well. Here's the agenda for today. So we can't fully understand the new data requirements rule until we understand the background of how the NAAQS was established, how the implementation process has looked to date. That's all important in terms of understanding what the DRR requires. We'll talk about just a general summary of what those requirements are and then get into some specifics around dispersion modeling obligations under the rule and ambient monitoring obligations under the rule. And then we'll wrap things up by talking about how we can plan ahead. Okay, so just some background on the 1 hour NAAQS to start. This may be redundant for some of us, but in June 2010, the 1 hour NAAQS was finalized. It was finalized at a level of 75 parts per billion, and it had that confusing averaging period or form of the standard, the 3-year average of the 99th percentile of 1 hour daily maximum concentration. So quite a mouthful, but we want to understand exactly what that means. Because it impacts the way that the modeling and monitoring will be conducted as part of the data requirements rule. So every day, if we have an ambient monitor that we're operating, we have a single highest hourly concentration or maximum hourly concentration that gets measured. So we have 365 total maximum daily concentrations every year. Under the form of the standard, we want to pick the 4th highest of those 365 values. And we do that same thing for 3 calendar years. And then we average those selected 4th highest values from the 3 consecutive calendar years together to come up with the number that I directly compare to the 196 microgram per cubic meter standard. So that's important from a modeling standpoint. We'll talk about that later. We knew when the NAAQS was promulgated in 2010 that it was stringent. Very stringent, and it's stringent for a number of reasons. One, it's very low. So if you look at the previous 3-hour ambient standard, that was 1,300 micrograms per cubic meter compared to now 196 on a shorter averaging time. The averaging time obviously results in problems because it accounts for worst-case conditions, worst-case meteorological conditions, potentially worst-case operational conditions. So everything we're looking at is really conservative, and add to that the additional layer that the tools that we have to evaluate the standard outside of monitoring are very conservative. So US EPA's dispersion models tend to overestimate concentrations, particularly for short-term standards. So we knew right away that this would be a real challenge for facilities that are required to directly evaluate compliance, and that's one of the things that the data requirements rule does. It's going to put some facilities in that position. Okay, so the NAAQS implementation history, let's just go back in time here and talk a little bit about what needs to happen when a NAAQS level is promulgated. When a NAAQS is promulgated, it starts a whole set of milestones, essentially, or deadlines. The clock starts ticking on some of those. So when a final NAAQS is promulgated, within 1 year, state agencies are required to submit proposed designations with that standard, and that's typically based on ambient monitoring data that they have available. EPA takes that information and then makes a final recommendation, and that final recommendation comes 120 days prior to it becoming final. So there's a window of time where state agencies and EPA can interact about those final designations. So for the 1 hour SO2 standard, after it was promulgated in June of 2010, state agencies submitted the available ambient monitoring data that they had. The problem that EPA had, or the hurdles that they perceived, is that how do you evaluate the 1 hour standard if you've got these obstacles in the way?